Jeff Cronenweth, a two-time Oscar nominee and the cinematographer for Being the Ricardos, was out December 10th before it arrives on Amazon, December 21st. Jeff, you were an Oscar nominee for The Social Network, actually, which was written by Aaron Sorkin. This is now 11 years later, your second film with Aaron. Obviously, he's directing this time as well. What made you want to reconnect with him for this project?
Well, he reached out to me, of course. He sent the script first, and once I read it, it was a no-brainer that he's such well, let me start over. I love Lucy. I love the whole genre. I love their lives. I was curious about the things behind the scenes, and having a family that's been in the industry for a very long time. I kind of had heard a lot of different things, and so I wanted to. It was an exciting opportunity to kind of delve into that history and learn more about it and see where the magic came from. And then after reading his script, it just was it's so magical, and it's so well conceived, and it's constructed so completely that I couldn't wait to indulge in it. And then we had so much success with Social Network, both visually, the way he wrote it, the way that David directed it, interpreted that, and that relationship. And a funny note, the last shot of Social Network, Fincher wanted to avoid the emotional goodbyes with everybody, and so left with one insert to be shot that Aaron directed and that I photographed. So that was really our first director cinematographer collaboration back at the end of Social Network.
Wow, that's awesome. I never knew that. That's so cool. What a good bit of history that is. You mentioned the script. I loved it also. I think he's obviously no kidding. Aaron Sorkin is an incredible writer, but he's known for obviously his quick wit and his scripts and the rapid fire dialogue. Can you talk about how you kind of visually match the pace of his words? And do you even try to, or had you conceptualize how to visualize the feeling and the speed that his script obviously has?
Well, I think he's overtly aware of his style and made it very clear to me that he wants to evolve his visual storytelling, that he wants to become a more diverse filmmaker in choices of light and in blocking sequences and staging actors, conceiving scenes where you can have more interaction and more camera movement if necessary, if it serves the scene. And so that said, he loved his experiences both on Molly's Game and of course with Faden on Chicago 7. Faden got an Oscar nomination for that. It was beautifully photographed film, but it was predominantly stuck in a courtroom. And my experience with a lot of director writers is that they would be content with just two people at a table talking the whole time, and then you could watch every word and it would be fun. But he's such a smart guy and such a complete storyteller that he understands that we can bring so much more to it if he allows the photography, light, camera movement, blocking, actor movement, all to kind of embellish his words. And so that was kind of our goal, or kind of the hurdle that we had to overcome, is to kind of break some of his old habits and comfort zones and bring this to some new life that he hadn't really gone for. Because he said that he really wanted to bring some of the visual style that Fincher and I had done over the last few movies that we had done together. And so that was the set. So that now you put ourselves in a 1952 I Love Lucy, and you have to kind of understand what that means or how we're going to actually articulate that on camera and stuff. And so it was full of wonderful challenges that I think resulted in a wonderful kind of palette for this movie.
So you mentioned the visual style. It's not the opening of a movie opens with a little bit of a framing device, but the first scene where we see you have Lucy and Desi are talking for the first time, and you focused on a radio with the Walter Winchell broadcast. You don't actually see Lucy and Desi. You hear them, and they're kind of in the foreground and blurry images, and it's so quick. And I just love the visual I just love that visual decision, I guess. And I think that's kind of maybe what you were talking about there with maybe stretching his visual style. But can you talk about like that sequence and like how you guys just like kind of wanted to, because we introduced the characters then with their voices, obviously, before we even see their faces. And I just thought that was a really cool decision, I guess. And I'd love to hear you talk about it.
Yeah, that's one of the scarier moments when I first read the script, is how we are going to convey that, because the way it was written was exactly the way that we ended up doing it. And I kept going back and forth about thinking that it's not enough. Like, we need to give more clues away. We need to have more positions. The time is so much screen time spent without anything happening, that is it going to work? And the more I did that, the more I realized that how actually brilliant the original conception of it was, the way he wrote it. And started to, I had them build the furniture setting on one of our empty spaces on stage, so that I could get a camera and start blocking out and figuring out how we could make those, there's only maybe 4 beats that you can have that makes it interesting. And so the radio was the centerpiece of that. And so the problem is, how do you incorporate everybody in it and always be aimed at the radio, since what's being said is what you really want the audience to take away, on top of like their fight that's happening, or what they're at. So I did a few things, like I put a mirror on the door of the radio, so that we could angle that door and get them reflected in it, so they stayed present while we were doing it. And we kept coming up with different ideas about how to keep them soft in the background or over them, but still engaged in the radio. And I think we came up with 3 or 4 things. We brought the radio out. We kind of reconstructed it so that it was at the front, because the way that they manufactured it, it was built back in the hole in a dark little cupboard. And so all those kind of things led, it was an evolution of discoveries and problem solving that got us to that point. And then in the end, I think it's quite wonderful when all this passion and drama, and then it recedes and they make up, and then bam, they're hit with Walter Winchell's communist comment. So
yeah, it's an incredible scene, because it really does so much that happens in that scene is like the whole, not the whole movie, but it is like a lot of the conflict of the whole movie is in that like 2-minute, 3-minute scene.
Exactly.
And it's really great. Another thing, you mentioned, like, obviously being a fan of I Love Lucy, the movie doesn't recreate obviously the show, but there are scenes where we see Lucille Ball, played by Nicole Kidman, having like, visions and like kind of like seeing the scenes of the show play out before they're actually even filmed. And I thought that's an interesting conceit as well. And I guess for you, how did you think of that? Because like those are scenes that maybe haven't happened yet that she's thinking about in her head, but they're obviously famous scenes from I Love Lucy that people will instantly recognize. So how did you go about like trying to figure out how to make that work without the direct recreation, I guess?
Well, I think that, again, that was the way that Aaron wrote it. It was in the script that in his mind, we never did see the show. The only time the show becomes present is when Lucy is trying to overcome some kind of comedic hurdle that she needs to solve, or that the group needs to solve. And that's where we utilize that. But it's never played out as a show until the very end, actually. And you see us filming it, but then it's more reality and behind the scenes than it is actually immersed into the show. So that brought up a few interesting things. When they photographed that show back in '52, they did it on film. They chose to do that because at the time it mostly was photographed on live shows were on the East Coast, and Desi and Lucy wanted to be on the West Coast. And then if you did a tape show and tried to record it or film the tape on a kinescope and back, then you really had low quality images. So they decided to shoot it on film on stage, and they would pay the extra cost of doing it that way, but then they owned the rights to it, which kind of introduced the beginning of syndication, right? And then Desi always thought that Lucy performed better in front of a live audience. So they brought in a live audience and did a 3-camera live show, which meant that they had to light the set from above so that the audience could still see the actors, and that the cameras could move freely to cover the scenes. And so it was very innovative at the time. But they were limited by technology. And so they had a 2-to-1 contrast ratio, meaning that it's almost flat everywhere you see. And it got built up along the way when it went through film and then back to tape or back to video and then broadcast and then to the rudimentary TVs that they had in the 50s. It created contrast. So when I wanted to replicate that, it's one of those decisions where you make, I can go and I can shoot it identical to the way that they did it, but they only did it that way because they were hindered by technology, right? And also, I feel like an audience today has grown up on Game of Thrones, and they're far more educated than the audience of 50s were, right? And so they expect more. So I shot those black and white scenes with the red monochrome camera, so it's dedicated black and white camera, and I added a little bit more contrast and a little bit more highlights, and I paid homage to it, and it's in the spirit of what the show was, but it's a modern version of that.
That's awesome. And a lot of the stuff you're saying about like how they shot the show, and it's great because obviously it's like mentioned in the movie, but not like into great detail. I love that Aaron's script seemingly trusts that the audience is going to like understand this or just, keep up basically. It's a lot of writing is like that. And it is really, really great. You mentioned how you love the era, and obviously you come from your father was a cinematographer and everything. I want to ask you about how much did the era of in the 1952, how much of the era did you factor into your visual style, if at all, like the lighting and specifically were you trying, not necessarily matching like movies and shows from the 50s, but like how much of that did you try to like emulate that kind of feeling, I guess?
Well, I feel like the 50s are kind of a loose signature of what it was because they were on their way. Color was coming up everywhere in cinema. It was cameras had evolved and film stocks had evolved. So it's not as heavy a signature as maybe the 40s were. So what I thought is it was all about quality of light, the type of light sources, tungsten light sources, practicals, and then it was set dressing and wardrobe and all the other things that go in with making a period piece. But where I did get to play a lot was in the flashbacks that was 10 years earlier, which was more like Harrell. If you're familiar with his stills, that was always kind of harder key lights and slashes and focused areas, almost like fashion noir, if you will, and so I did that for the flashbacks. There's 5 or 6 scenes in the movie where they're about 10 years younger, and I did that, and I did it on where Lucy meets Desi on a set of Too Many Girls, and we did the same thing. We used hard light and we used the certain tonalities and all the regular sources that they had at the time to kind of create that era. And so that was super fun. I mean, Harrell did it. My grandfather was a still photographer. He won the last Oscar they gave out for portrait photography because they used to have a category for it. Because they couldn't shoot next to us like they do today. They had to create their own sets, direct the talent, and then photograph them off set. And so he and Harrell had this very kind of 40s style, starlet, if you will, styles. And so it was fun to kind of embrace those in those flashback scenes.
Yeah, I love those scenes. They look so great. And I guess before we wrap up, just general question, obviously, what is a great piece of advice or maybe like something that you've gotten along the way that you were like, as a cinematographer, that you kind of still carry with you and that you had heard, at any point in your life, I guess?
Well, I'll say too, I think that you should trust your initial instincts and go with what you feel is close to your heart in taking risk. And I think you should embrace fear because fear keeps you, if fear overwhelms you and stops you from accomplishing it, that's a distraction. But if you utilize fear to keep you fresh, to keep you from repeating your own mistakes, to keep you from pushing boundaries, to keep you on point, and then I think it's a great tool to embellish because all of us, no matter how long we've been doing it, you walk onto that stage door and look at that set, it takes your breath away for a second and you're like, oh gosh, how am I going to do this today? And then you settle down and then you start breaking down the scene and blocking and figuring out how it's going to work out. So fear is a wonderful thing to keep you fresh and alert and progressive and out of a box that you can find yourself in, get out of your comfort level.
I think that's great advice. Jeff Cronenweth, cinematographer for Being the Ricardos, out December 10th before it comes to Amazon on December 21st. Thank you so much, Jeff. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Harris Zambarloukos, cinematographer for Belfast, out this month from Focus features. Harris, I want, this is including Death on the Nile, which obviously comes out next year. Belfast is one of 8 films that you've made with Kenneth Branagh as director. How early in the process does he come to you to talk about it, and specifically with Belfast? Like, when did you get brought into the conversations about it?
We started talking about a potential film during lockdown. So we would have these almost 2 weekly conversations, just checking up on each other. We had just wrapped Death on the Nile, and Ken was doing his post, and then COVID started. We were actually meant to go to Egypt for some additional beauty shots, and we were meant to fly it on March the 11th. So that got cancelled, obviously, or at that time postponed. But we had these great conversations over lockdown, just checking up on each other. And Ken said, I am diligently writing every day from 9 o'clock. I go to my little shed and I write, and I've got something. I don't want to say anything about it because I want you to read it with fresh eyes. But we did talk about our desire to make something really swiftly after the world opened up again, that it felt like this would be something good for us, good for the film industry, and that let's turn this into an opportunity to make something personal, and to gather our crew, our family of crew, and make something quite personal. I have to say, Chris, I didn't know what to expect, but I had a suspicion it might be something like our first film we made, which was Sleuth, that was just 2 people in a room. I thought that's so COVID safe, and all that while we'd be talking about COVID protocols. And then Ken sent me the script to read and said, we're off. And first of all, it was such a moving script. I was so proud of him as a friend, not just the director, but that, most of us accomplished, I don't know, a little bit of baking during lockdown. He'd actually written this absolutely spectacular script. And then it sunk in that it was quite a complex film with riot scenes and a young actor, an 85-year-old vulnerable actor who happens to be a national treasure. It all sunk in. And we started prepping that way. So I would say very, very early on. But I was given at least the opportunity to read it without any explanation, which I thought was really good.
So for those who don't know, the film is obviously a coming of age kind of autobiographical film that Kenneth wrote, and like you said, young actor Judi Dench is in it as his grandmother, and Jamie Dornan as his father, Catriona Balfe as his mother, and Kieran Hines as his grandfather. It's a black and white film. It's beautiful photography. I wanted to ask you about like the decision to do it in black and white and the style of black and white. It's so crisp, for lack of a better word, and like it's so bright, and a lot of scenes set during the day. And I just want obviously there were probably a lot of different ways you could have gone with the black and white photography and how it looks. How did you come up with that look, and what were those conversations like?
Well, the film is not just black and white. There is some color and some black and white mixed with color in the same scenes. So that is a process that we had done in the past. It was just in Death on the Nile starts off in black and white and in French. But it was a small portion of it. In this case, we are predominantly black and white. When I read the script, I asked Ken, so do you think we should shoot this in black and white? For many reasons that I'll go into, that we've already kind of have a language of black and white that we've maybe expressed in the past. And he said, I think so, but I would like to do some color as well. Regarding the black and white, kind of my feeling about black and white versus color is really one of selection process for the audience, i.e. that we as filmmakers would have a certain amount of control about the information that the audience receives. And I find color to be very, very descriptive and fantastic in immediately giving you information. It immediately tells you the color of someone's hair or the time of year, etc. But it's quite a lot of information. And I believe in telling a story that you need a certain brevity and minimalism, and that this isn't just in color versus black and white. This is something we express with Ken in how we block a scene together, how we kind of are quite minimalist in the movement and in the way we space actors apart rather than close together and try and keep them apart until there seems to be a dramatic need to move. So black and white for this film helped us basically make a stiller film, and one where we felt it was more lucid and more immersive in its portrayal of the emotion. We felt that you could feel what the actors felt a little more deeply in black and white, and that's one of black and white's attributes. It will not create a feeling or an emotion that is not there. It helps the audience see it in a more lucid way. And it also has a slightly transcendental kind of quality in that it could be both have naturalism and be magical at the same time. It could almost be evocative of memory rather than the present. So all those qualities were things that we felt that we were an attribute to the film. And in the past, really, when color came in, you had an opportunity to make films either in color or black and white. It was a choice. And in stills photography today, you could choose to take a portrait in black and white, and that might give you an insight into the human condition of the person you're portraying in a more lucid way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's incredible. You mentioned like the emotion of the film. I want you, and you mentioned having like a young actor. Jude Hill plays Buddy. It's kind of stand-in. He's obviously like a young actor, newcomer. It's such a great performance, and I think like the movie, not necessarily, it really works so well because it's like you're capturing such like it feels so genuine, the performance. And I guess as a cinematographer, when you're working with a young, inexperienced star, especially alongside like such talent that is in there, like how do you go about like drawing those kind of performance that helping Jude get to that level of performance? Or is it like what were your tricks, I guess, or just in general like what you try to do?
Well, first of all, Jude is a natural, so he didn't really need a lot. You just have to capture it. The only thing that we kind of tried to tutor him a little bit towards was just not looking at the camera. He would just love to. I think he was so fascinated by the camera that he was drawn to it at certain moments. But I would say that the cast, Kenneth and the crew, and I really applaud all the crew for this, made a very, very comfortable environment for a child. We looked at it, through either our experiences as parents or as human beings, where you make an environment that is just safe and polite and nurturing. And I think that's just, I believe, the human nature that exists in, and that in crews, and that they do a lot even in their silence, and that we should commend our crews for things like that. They make it comfortable for a child to perform. And that's important. But it all stems from the top. I mean, Ken made it very safe for us to work under these conditions. He took such care in the protocols when there were no history of it. So I think that triggered down. The cast also was fantastic and encouraging. In terms of kind of a little bit of trickery there, I would say we would often pretend it's a rehearsal and run the camera. So we also had a kind of silent code of turnover. He's so sharp though, Jude. He soon recognized that there was a little red camera on the camera, a little red light on the camera. But so we taped that up and masked it as best as we could. Again, from my crew, I'd be like winking or something because they were fixing something in the background or removing something, or and that would mean just get out of the frame, please, as quickly as you can. And I know there are moments in the film like that. I would also say that we set the frame up in a certain way, quite wide and quite still, that allowed for things to happen within the frame without forcing it too much. And we played a lot of things by windows because it was more COVID safe. We played people away from each other and not facing each other in these kind of vignettes for that. We used available light pretty much 90% of the time. So if the weather changed or the clouds rolled in or dappled light came in, we would make sure that the effects of it were framed up in some area so that it became part of the scene. That gave a kind of floatiness in a way to scenes. We looked at it as if we were fly on the wall kind of photojournalists inspired by Magnum, that we could be as exquisite in our framing while being invisible in our presence during the film.
Yeah. No, that's really great, Harris. Harris Zambarloukos, cinematographer for Belfast, Kenneth Branagh's new film. I feel like we can talk about this for so long, but we do have to wrap up. Thank you so much, Harris. I appreciate it. Thank you. Lena Sandgren, Oscar-winning cinematographer, whose new project is No Time to Die, out now in theaters. Lena, this is the fifth and final James Bond film for Daniel Craig. Your first Bond movie. His series of films obviously like really had a lot of connective tissue between them. I guess I wanted to talk when you came into this project, the look you wanted to do for No Time to Die. Did you try to keep it in conversation with the previous films, or did you start just start from scratch and what was your initial thought about it?
We started from scratch. I mean, I had discussions with Carrie early on about what is the essence of sort of the Bond genre in general and where we want to live with it. And Carrie was very much into making a film being an adventure and escapistic journey that just should be as close to the heart of Bond as possible, what we felt was the heart of Bond. So we started to explore that. But what he sort of talked to me about a lot was to create a journey that was just a very dramatic journey from the most brutal to the most intimate and emotional. So I think always when you start a film, you need to find the language for the film, and in this case, it was a lot about sort of this journey of a roller coaster in emotions.
Yeah, that's really great. It is interesting because you're right. There's so many incredibly big set pieces, and then I think you get to do a lot of obviously emotional scenes that are I think unique for the Bond franchise, certainly.
Yeah,
and it's really, really cool. You start the roller coaster kind of starts at a peak almost, because the opening sequence is such a big action scene in Italy. You have this incredible car chase and motorcycle chase. I love the way you're able to, in the film, uses the actual location. Can you talk a little about how you guys thought about that opening sequence, and how much was it you looking for the perfect spot in Matera, Italy, versus I'd love to hear about that and how you guys kind of accomplished that.
So from scene to scene, it was interesting to think about connecting obviously the locations to what was going on emotionally in the film, and the film actually starts in the winter, right, in this ice cold winter, and that part of the story of the film is sort of told in a kind of a suspenseful thriller way, where we felt like the visuals should be connected to those emotions in that storyline. And then you cut to a very romantic setting in Italy, and what was curious and interesting was, I think, that that town that we found in Italy had not only both sort of the romantic picturesque qualities that fit very, very well for the beginning of that sequence, but it also were made in stone, so that it would be a very hard location to sort of have action sequences within. And therefore that location I thought was really a beautiful spot, because it could give us first, the romantic Italy, and then we could throw the audience straight into very brutal and hard action. And I think throughout the film we always considered the locations and the time of day and the lighting and the colors of the locations to be connected with the sort of the mood we wanted to achieve in these scenes, and which was very close connected with the emotions of the scenes, and then also that we got a good variation of locations, so that we would cut from a cold to a warm, or from a colorful blue night to a red interior. So we got a lot of, like, we wanted to sort of, we wanted to feel like the film took place all over the world, and that it was sort of an escapistic type of journey that we got to be with. We would get to be with Bond in this sort of amazing journey. But within that, you have. Oh, sorry, now I lost it further. Yeah, I don't know. Did I finish that well, or?
No, that's okay. That's good. You mentioned like this. Obviously, no, it's good. Obviously, it's a globe-spanning production. It's also massive. You had worked previously with IMAX on First Man. This movie, it feels like. I mean, I venture to say half of the movie maybe is in IMAX and shot in IMAX. How did that affect like what you wanted to do visually, and the challenges of? I know obviously those cameras are so big and everything. How did that like? How did you work with that and kind of like figure out when you wanted to deploy the IMAX technology, let's say? Yeah,
so first of all, part of our discussions in what is a Bond movie, like what is the heart of Bond, and part of that felt like we should work in an anamorphic 35 environment. Like the whole film is basically an anamorphic 35, but with the also idea of maximizing the moviegoer's experience. We felt that going wider, or actually taller, would help for certain sequences. So that's why we deployed IMAX, which then in the largest IMAX theaters you would see it in 143, but in the 240, you have the 240 in the film, but in those sequences it would just open up below your feet to get you even more immersed into the image and have the image completely surrounding you. And I mean, we were fortunate enough to be able to work with those cameras, and I think it's a matter of sort of just being more engulfed into the image. And we just had that throughout the film, that as much as we wanted to be wide like that, we also then in other scenes went very intimate and close. And another thing was also that we really wanted to experience everything through Bond. So we, in a lot of time of the film in those action sequences, we also didn't want to like go to extra dramatic, crazy, unrealistic stunts, but everything should feel very realistic, as if it happened for real, and that we felt the brutality very intimate with Bond. So in a lot of those sequences too, we just spend a lot of time very close to him in those action sequences as well.
I wanted to ask you about one of those towards the end of the film. There's an incredible one shot up the steps that he's dispatching bad guys. It's such a thrilling scene, because it just is like, as a viewer, you're kind of like realizing that there are no cuts and how choreographed and complicated it is. It's so exciting. Can you talk a little about like setting that shot, thinking about that and executing that sequence, because it is really a showstopper, as it were.
Right. Well, part of that end sequence that you're talking about, that part is also sort of a kind of metaphoric about his journey walking up the staircase, just hitting villains along the way, right? But he's trying to reach the top. He's trying to climb up to the top, and he's being shot at. It's very metaphoric, I think, for the film when you've seen it. But and so that was important. It was important. It was going to be the most. He had already gone through so much, and he had been like shot at and been fighting throughout the movie. And this is like he's even hurt, and he gets up the staircase through all this fire, and it's quite it was quite important for us that was going to be a one take, because when you do one takes, even in other films, like when I did in La La Land, we did one takes. It's all about like really making sure that people know that we're there. Like you're not like cutting around things. You're actually there, and so we have to walk up the staircase with him, handheld. It's like, I think you always find your language for the film, but you also find the language for the scenes, and I think you always have to be careful about why is it a dolly shot or why is it a handheld shot. In our language, handheld in this film was when Bond was sort of not stable. And in other sequences, when Bond is very much in control or someone is in control, we use dolly shots or moves or crane moves that were more smooth. And so our language was that when he was unstable, we always shot handheld. So we would feel, the idea was that the audience should also feel like that this could go really wrong. And so that was a complicated shot to do, because we knew we wanted to go up with him, but as you know, there's the camera and the focus puller has to walk around in an environment that is also has to light the actor without shadowing him, etc. So it was kind of a complicated logistically to set it up, but I'm very happy with that sequence being like for the story of it. Like when he goes up that staircase, it's a tough journey. Yeah.
Yeah. We have to wrap up here, but how many times did you have to do that sequence to get it?
I actually don't remember, but I know that we had to reset overnight in order to come back. I think we shot it twice only, actually.
Yeah, it's incredible.
We rehearsed it, so.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Incredible scene, and like you said, I think it really does tie thematically to the film itself. Lena Sandgren, cinematographer for No Time to Die, in theaters now. Thank you so much. Ari Wegner, cinematographer for The Power of the Dog, coming out in theaters later in November before it hits Netflix on December 1st. Jane Campion, obviously one of the master filmmakers of like the last 35 years or more. I want to ask you, what surprised you, I guess, about working with her and getting to do this film with her that you maybe weren't expecting?
Yeah, I mean, every director is always a surprise. I think even if you've worked with them before, this is my first time with Jane, and obviously, I mean, I was a huge fan of hers or fan of her work. She was, I think really her films were my entry point really into cinema as a teenager, kind of discovering that cinema can be something more than just entertainment. It can really be an art form. And yeah, in terms of surprises, I mean, so much. I think what I love about, one of the things I really love about Jane is she really makes her films kind of in the same way that she lives, which is a very open-hearted, kind of curious, vulnerable, honest, collaborative kind of family vibe. Just I think seeing that, I guess when you're making a film, you have to decide obviously how you want it to look, etc. But then there's also how do you want to make it? Like, how do you want the shoot day to feel? What works for a director? What do they need to feel like they're comfortable and in a place where they can be creative and have freedom? And Jane's so amazing at being able to articulate upfront what she needs, what she wants, and kind of set those in motion in a very early way. I learned that was a kind of beautiful surprise and lesson. And then as well, I think just working with her, we did a huge amount of prep. We prepped for almost a year, which was, again, one of the things that she very early on said, I need this, is what I really want. This is how I would think I can make this film in the best way, to not just have a DP start, 6-8 weeks before, but to really be with them for that whole time, to know that the ideas that you're shooting, they're not a first draft, they're something you've really kind of gone over and over and explored every possible option. So definitely in the pre-production process, seeing how she worked is very, again, like just the idea that creativity is a kind of, it's a very like delicate thing, and you can't push it. You can't force yourself to come up with a solution right now. So there'd be times where we kind of boarding and working really hard and come up against a problem. And in the past, I think I would usually just keep pushing till you kind of try and find a solution. And, you know, Jane would say something like, do you have your swimsuit with you? Should we go for a swim? Or let's go for a walk? Or I think it's time for a nap. Those kind of really different way of approaching work, and actually that can be really productive, that kind of stepping away can be a way to overcome a hurdle rather than just trying to push. And then I think also that, I don't know, you watch Jane's films and they seem so planned, so specific, and we definitely wanted that. We wanted to arrive on day one with a really clear plan, but also that, how do you do that and then be open to something that could happen, and stay in touch with your kind of gut feeling, even with the pressure of all the people that are there, and to have the courage or the foresight to stay in touch with your gut and be able to say, yeah, I know we planned this thing with this crane and someone traveled from really far to bring the thing for this special thing, but actually I think it's not working. I've got this, what it's lacking is this, and let's do this instead, and not dwell on it or kind of judge it or feel apologetic, but just say this is better. And that was really kind of a beautiful, I guess, surprise and an amazing lesson to learn. Yeah,
no, that's awesome. The movie, obviously, I love it's set in 1920s Montana. I know you shot in New Zealand, filling in for like that American West frontier. The landscapes are so vast and beautiful, and then you have every performance is so nuanced and subtle and like internalized, and I just was like, it blew me away how you're able to balance the vastness of the landscape with like these very, very subtle performances. And can you talk a little about that and not losing the performances within the landscape, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the film is always about kind of big and small. It's this vast place, but what's really of interest is these tiny little nuances, and the what's very kind of Jane's real skill. And we think about all the iconic Jane Campion scenes that you love. It's really a few people and the energy kind of between them, and the subtlety and the nuance and the ambiguity. So yeah, we knew that was going to be I did anyway. And it was a film about big place, and then these tiny, it could be a look or that someone touching another body is like electric. So yeah, we made sure we were making sure we were going to capture the landscape with obviously beautiful kind of wide shots, and then I guess as well, like macro shots became a real thing for us, and the power of cutting to something very tight. And there's some, whether that be a nature shot that kind of takes on a symbolism or a meaning because of the shots around it and what you know, or something like, I guess because of the time period as well, it's a time where the very themes of the film are about, no one can talk about really what they're thinking or feeling. There's not either they don't have the emotional kind of language to even talk about it, or the environment, the culture at the time is, there are some things that are just too dangerous to talk about. So how do you shoot a scene which is kind of like, maybe we think of it as it's a dialogue scene, but what if we were to shoot that like a love scene? So to see someone rolling a cigarette or doing the rope, these very kind of sensual shots, and to kind of imbue some of that sensuality into an action which is otherwise wouldn't have that kind of emotional electricity to it. Yeah, I think that's kind of the, I guess, big and small, so like wide and tight really is the kind of crux of it.
the other thing I want to ask you about from obviously, so it's the Burbank brothers are played by Benedict Cumberbatch and Jesse Plemons. They have this massive mansion that's like in the middle of nowhere. I love the way you make it. It just looks so it's so big and like, but like so run down. I guess can you talk about like shooting inside there and like making how it just feels so cold, for lack of a better word. It's incredible that you're able to accomplish that through just the visuals. So I guess, can you talk a little about that?
Yeah, the house was always going to be a big thing. It's described very kind of beautifully in the book, and it really is kind of like a boat on the ocean. It's kind of in the middle of nowhere, and this kind of strange luxury bubble bubble of wealth that's kind of in this very otherwise brutal kind of dusty environment. So it's also a place that like Jane's films, I think, and particularly this one, there's always a kind of a friction between masculine and feminine. And for us, the house was it's a place that's been devoid of any kind of feminine touch or any maternal love or any kindness, or kind of that's all kind of been drained out of it. So we got very specific with the I guess even just what you can say with kind of furniture. It's this kind of weird mismatch of luxury but a bit of neglect, or no one really turns the lights on anymore, or kind of it's all a bit there probably was a time where it had a different vibe, and things have just gone a bit weird. And then we worked really closely with Grant Major, our production designer, who's just incredible artist really, to design the house, and to also kind of get that I guess in many ways it could be a Western, but actually this is for us more of like a monster film or a vampire film, where you get the sense that there's a monster is in the house. So how can we create a house that kind of supports that feeling? So just these doors everywhere, so many doors, dark corridors, designing it in a way to have this dark timber paneling, dark floorboards, dark just a sense of darkness in this kind of what should really be a refuge, a house in the middle of a really harsh environment. It actually is not a refuge at all. It's kind of just as oppressive and kind of awful than the rest of the world. And again, the way we kind of designed it with these very specific, I guess we had quite a few shots in mind even before we started to build and design. So knowing that, for example, we wanted Phil to be Benedict's character to be able to be looked down on Rose, Kirsten's character, playing the piano, and to design it in a way that he could always be kind of looking down on her from a window to outside, or up on the from his room down, and that she's kind of this little kind of animal, a bit like the rabbit that you see in the other scene. She's kind of trying her best to find a safe place, but there isn't one. So yeah, it's a very holistic kind of thing, from design to shots and how that all works together. But yeah, I can't praise Grant's work enough. Just really, that house is, I mean, it's the work of a beautiful architect to design a house like that, and a house that is really designed for camera. So having a designer that can work with you to think about, what aspect ratio are going to be, what kind of lenses are you going to be using, and from that inform, well, what should be the scale of the rooms to give that impression, so it feels big and kind of cavernous, but also claustrophobic. How high should the top of the doorways be? How high should the ceiling be? All those kind of things. And I guess when you've got a year to plan it, you can really get deep into the delicious details of how to create a space that can really support the story.
Yeah, I mean, I think that definitely comes through in the finished film as well. Ari Wegner, Power of the Dog, out later this month, on November in theaters, and on Netflix December 1st. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Christopher.
Harry Zambarloukos, cinematographer for Belfast. Lena Sandgren, cinematographer for No Time to Die, and Ari Wegner, cinematographer for The Power of the Dog. Thank you all so much for doing this. I guess I wanted to just to start here. I'd love to hear about, a motivating factor, or reason you guys wanted to get into cinematography and into this craft. Ari, I'll start with you, and then we could go around.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually kind of a latecomer to cinema. I had a very analog, I guess, childhood with a lot more kind of art and a lot of visual art and books, etc. But we really didn't have cinema wasn't a big thing in our household, so I came super late to it. But what I was always into as a kind of child and teenager was writing stories and storytelling. And then at a certain point, I also discovered photography, stills photography, and spent many hours in the dark room and kind of that thing. And then I realized there was a certain point, I guess I realized there was a job that could actually bring those two things together, which is like visuals, photography, and storytelling to have a whole, blew my mind that could actually be a job. And as soon as I realized that could be a thing I was in, it's really what gets me super excited to take a story and figure out how to translate it into visuals. And that's what still gets me up. That was what got me as a teenager, and it's still like kind of, I get high on that that kind of thing. Yeah.
That's great. Linus, how about yourself?
Kind of similar, actually. I was very much into, I did a lot of drawing. I did write stories, small. We did some books together with my friends, and I mean, like cartoon books or whatever. And we were drawing, and I was also doing like Super 8 short films, lots of experimental small short films as a teenager. I never thought about it as like anything but playing, But then, as I got into high school and stuff, I started to take on like. When we did like projects in science or whatever, I would be the one with that would write about it or have a camera, and I had a camera and I photographed, documented our excursions, and I sort of always find a way to work a little more with the visuals and storytelling already. At the same time, my father worked with distribution and imported a lot of films to Sweden, which obviously, in retrospect, I know obviously impacted me a lot. Like, I mean, I've saw so many films, and in general, actually, more like art house films that he would import from all over the world, like Kieslowski or Jane Campion, by the way, and whatever, like beautiful films from all over the world that I actually watched as a teenager, being very inspired by films, and became kind of some sort of cineast at an early age. But I didn't think about it, filmmaking as a job. So I was very much into also, biology, science, that kind of stuff. So I was actually, looking for, should I go into like science in a university or art? and I actually ended up going to an art school, and then I got hired to work for two still photographers, and that's when I realized that it could be a job, photography, that you actually can work with this. And it's strange, but I got into photography basically first, and then I got into cinematography after that as a natural sort of but I don't know, it was always about visual storytelling, I think, really, actually.
Yeah, that's great. And Harris, last but certainly not least, how about yourself?
Not too dissimilar. I grew up in Cyprus, a very small island, very few people. We certainly have not much of a history of cinema, so I was just not on any awareness that I had. But I loved art, and I loved maths, and I kind of had to persuade my parents that I wasn't going to study maybe engineering or more science, and they were gracious enough to let me go to an art school in London, a university called St. Martin's School of Art. And what's great there is you do a foundation course and you try various things. You try theater and some painting and some sculpture, and all of a sudden you do cinema. And from me growing up as kind of teenager in the 80s, and my version of films was pretty much the Blues Brothers and Back to the Future. They show you a Buñuel film, And I was just blown away that there was such a thing as kind of a fine art film. And I switched. That's what I wanted to do. And I was drawn to camera. I was interested in stills as fine art, so kind of adept in a dark room and with a stills camera. And I just felt I could contribute to storytelling through lighting and camera and through a kind of visual contribution. And it all started there, really.
Nice, that's great. And speaking with all of you, obviously, all your projects are incredible, and it seemed like lots of challenges that you were able to overcome in different ways and different different locations and all these different things. I guess when you were like, was there when you were first starting out in this industry, was there like a piece of advice or you received or anything that you like have carried with you to like get through like a challenging moment in a shoot or just in general, like maybe the best advice you've received on that front? Harry, since you went, I'll start with you here and then we'll go back around, but not to put you on the spot, but yeah.
Well, I have to say that one thing that kind of kept me thinking about how to maintain a kind of like the visuals on a film was something that really took me away. Someone said, I can't remember who it was, but they said that you're only as good as your worst shot in a film. And that threw me. Like that just was such a weight to bear. But I think that was in a way a kind of good bit of advice that has helped me through, in that you have to think of a film as a whole, and that there's got to be clarity and continuity. It also meant that if you have a lot of bad shots, it kind of all fits together. But it helped me, I think, in kind of thinking about things in that way, and that you've got to keep a momentum and you've got to keep a certain set a bar for yourself, and then it's only up to you to fulfill that. It's not for anyone else.
Yeah. Linus, how about yourself?
One thing I think of is that I worked as an electrician to an amazing gaffer who worked with Sven Nykvist on all his Swedish films, and he was a very simple man. He did everything very simple, and he told me that less is more, basically, in lighting, and that there's only one sun, and that you don't need to overcomplicate things. And I mean, just thinking about an advice that I always carry with me is like, I think about him actually very often, like many times a year, when I'm working and I'm like getting into complicated situations and just trying to think like, how can we simplify this? Like that's sort of my goal on when I plan lighting. I find oftentimes I meet like collaborators. I'm on a commercial and I meet a gaffer who would like want to have like this huge package or whatever, and I'm like, I think surprise people a lot of times of how much I actually appreciate to minimize sort of the lighting, and that goes for everything. I think it's kind of a good advice, I think, to think about in filmmaking.
No, that's great. And Ari, last but not least, how about yourself?
Yeah, it's always a hard question, like the best bit of advice. One thing that comes to mind was it wasn't given to me directly, but was kind of via another young DP at the time, but from Andrew Lesney, who kind of explained to him that there's maybe kind of two categories of director. There's some directors want a facilitator and some will want a collaborator. And you can obviously, maybe either of those is attractive to you, but for me, it's how to kind of find people to work with that really want to collaborate with you. And I guess every director kind of exists on that spectrum of how much they know they want, or that they're really set in, and how much they don't. And maybe both ends of the spectrum are kind of, the pure facilitator is maybe not something that really draws me in, but the pure collaborator is a real, I don't know, it's super attractive. It's just a very different relationship, those two situations. One feels like technician and one feels like artist, and I guess to try and have that at the forefront of your mind before you start a project, to really try and envisage what's this relationship going to be like? How much is this person wanting to kind of be challenged and challenge me, and how to get to something really interesting together. Yeah, that definitely stayed with me as a little tidbit of info. It was really great.
Yeah, so before we were recording, you guys were all speaking very highly of each other, and I get the sense that cinematographers are very, there's a great camaraderie amongst the group of all of you in general and in the field. Can you guys, in the last few years, what are some shots or anything that you were like really like, oh, that like is a really special shot? It doesn't have to be your own film or anybody's here. I just was curious of what other stuff you're seeing that you're like, that is a really incredible example of the art form that you were maybe inspired by or just in general like really appreciated. Linus, do you want to go first?
Oh, putting me on the spot.
Sorry.
Just trying to think of something now quickly. I mean, there's so much. I mean, I agree with you. We all like have a great camaraderie within cinematographers. I think a lot of other departments are maybe not as much, collaborating or appreciating each other. But I have to think of a film. I mean, there's so many. Let me think. Can I think a little bit about it?
Yeah, sure. Ari, do you want to try to take a stab at it?
Thanks for that warm up, Linus. I was also freaking out about being the first one.
We feel for you, Linus.
The one I think that comes to mind for me is a film called Stranger by the Lake, shot by Claire Mathon, and I really love her work. I love how she can do night, especially, which is always such a thing for DPs. Like, what does night look like? How do you, I don't know, you've spent every day of your life, you've experienced night, and then somehow you try and recreate it, and it's always kind of not quite right. But she does it so well in that film in particular, and also just the visual approach for that film, the power of a repeated shot in storytelling is so powerful. It really like struck me in that film that you can have a shot the same, a shot the same, a shot the same, and then the same shot, but some little thing has changed, and it's just like I don't know, the human mind is so amazing at picking up those differences, and that how repetition can be so useful in storytelling. And I don't know how it's something to do with cinema and the human kind of way we think and remember things. You're not even aware that you're picking up all that information, but when you see a shot that you've seen before, you somehow remember what it was before and what's changed. And when that integrates in the story in a really like emotional kind of punch, is just like, I don't know, for me that's kind of like pure cinema of without seeing anything dramatic. It's literally like cars in a car park, cars in a car park, cars in a car park, no cars in a car park. And that's like the most unemotional kind of shot you can think of, but in the film it just like gets you in the gut. That's so beautiful.
That's great. That's a great answer. Harris, do you want to take a stab?
That's a really hard question. I have to say, there's a scene in a film called Loveless, a Russian film that, and I love that film. It's almost like about just like the cost of bad parenting in a way, just to just dramatize to such a tragic, cathartic level. But it's that scene where the door opens and the child's been overhearing all of this, and it had such a strong symbolism for me, but a really kind of not symbolism in a gratuitous way, but in a emotional way that what we say and what we do, its impact on other people, your responsibility, your humanity, your responsibility as a human. I felt that there are very few times in cinema where that what we say and what we do and how it affects other people is so costly. And it's almost an image that haunts me, I think.
No, that's really great. And Linus, last to go back to you, have you gotten a chance to think of anything?
Yeah, you know, like you put me on this, it's hard, but I do have one film I always think of. It was a while back, but it's The Return, actually, by Andrei Zvyagintsev, and which is similarly told. Like, it's so powerfully told. I think about it a lot of times because it's a drama, right, about a relationship between a mother and her sons meeting their returning dad for the first time, and I don't know why. We don't know why he's returning, and the storytelling, the visual storytelling of this has very little dialogue, and it's told almost like a horror movie, even though it's a dramatic relationship drama. And the power of the cinematography in it is that you make the audience feel like really uncomfortable by the lack of dialogue, by the lack of what do you call it? The lack of communication, and the cinematography in it is really powerful this way. How they tell the story very simply. They're sitting by a dinner table, and the mother's just they're eating, and it's so stiff. The situation is really hard, and the mother is saying, not the father, mother is saying, your father would take you on a trip. And then it's just like one son is running off, and then you cut to the car is being packed, and they get in the car, they drive off. It's just throughout the film, it's an amazing film, I think. Actually, the visual storytelling is very powerful.
Yeah,
but I mean, there's obviously lots of beautiful films that's been done lately, and it's just hard to come up in this quick.
I think that's totally fine. And that was a great answer. I want to thank all of you. Your films are also wonderful and full of these really incredible images. So it's a pleasure talking about them. Ari Wegner, Power of the Dog, coming theaters in November before it's Netflix on December 1st. Lena Sandgren, No Time to Die, in theaters now. And Harris Zambarloukos, Belfast, also in theaters in November. Thank you again. It was great chatting with you about these films and your craft.